Africa as a whole is one of the poorest continents on Earth. For example, in South Africa, Botswana, or in the States in Northern Africa is GDP higher. GDP per capita at constant prices and adjusted for warriors' price conditions is over $10,000. On the contrary, if we look at Sub-Saharan Africa and forgot about Botswana and the Republic of South Africa, we have many countries barely have a GDP of $3,000 per capita. For comparison, Slovakia has a GDP per capita of $30,000 in 2017. In this video, we look at the economic side of Sub-Saharan Africa more precisely, and we will explain why Africa is so poor. GDP is not a very good indicator because we see only power of economics in general. Africa has the highest proportion of people in absolute poverty. In 2015, more than 40% of people in Sub-Saharan Africa lived on less than $1.90 a day in purchasing power parity, compared to North Africa and the Middle East, where share is only 2.6%. Indeed, it's a combination of historical and economic circumstances. Each African country is specific, but within the continent we can generalize a bit. A strong blow to Africa was slavery, which lasted from the 17th to the 19th century, but probably even stronger was a colonization from the 19th to the middle of the 20th century. At the time, in short, a country like Belgium, France or the United Kingdom had decided to draw state borders in Africa. Suddenly, only a few states emerged from thousands of tribes and other groups. The diversity of the ethnic groups in the countries is well illustrated by Nigeria, where there is more than 500 languages. When they freed themselves in 60s and 70s, the African country began to become independent, so much that it fell into the hands of the local people. But for a long time, instability developed due to multitude of ethnics, tribes and the general population. Dictators came to power, who often had unlimited power and army, and the dictatorship practically arose, which in some cases resulted in genocide. Examples are the civil wars in Somalia or the Democratic Republic of the Congo, as well as the recent conflict in South Sudan and the genocide in Rwanda in the 90s. From an economic point of view, any war is a waste of productive capital, especially in the poor countries, where their war only makes them more poor. It must not be forgotten that conflicts in Africa continue to arising. At the same time, Sub-Saharan Africa also has a problem with infrastructure. In some parts, they suffer from a lack of drinking water or a lack of transport network. In addition, there is poor or inaccessible education and at the same time poor hygiene conditions, which is a living ground for diseases. If we look at it economically, the main problem is the instability of the environment. Imagine that you are a company and would like to start a business here, for example in the field of mining. You have most likely encountered corruption and clientelism. You would have problems with institutions that are unlikely to work anymore. If you need any work tools or equipment, you will run into a problem. And of course you need people for work. Most African countries are developing economies, ranking more at the bottom of the rankings, which means that, for example, they have an underdeveloped economy that is predominantly focused on agriculture and largely still performs barehanded. This goes hand in hand with weak human capital, and that is the problem with education. If we look on it through economic theory, the problems in Sub-Saharan Africa are production chains, and for companies, the intermediate good markets. If you have the aforementioned mine, you will need expensive trucks and machines or other equipment and also electricity. If electricity often turns off in a given country, this is not only a problem for you, but also for your suppliers who manufacture machines for you. Here is the so-called multiplier effect, where problems are passed on the others and they create even bigger problems. In our country, it is reduction of the productivity, quality or later delivery of intermediate products. By default, if you were in a developed economy with a functioning markets and suppliers sold you low-quality machines, you would simply replace it. Corruption, clientelism, and institutional damage are taking place in African countries. Ultimately, even the best suppliers in a country are likely be worse than the worst supplier in a developed country. The problem is exacerbated when these intermediates are complementary. That is, they complement each other and your production chain is very long. For example, envision making Boeing in Africa, which has millions of parts and each one must be perfect. We probably don't have to say it's impossible. At the end of the day, it is more advantageous for companies to invest elsewhere where they have better infrastructure and stability of the business environment. After all, it is enough to look at the mine in Africa like this. Or at another, for example in Canada or the USA. We probably don't have to talk about differences in productivity. With regards to Africa, many experts also point to humanitarian aid coming to Africa. They claim that in the end, humanitarian aid not helping Africa to escape from poverty, not to mention that sometimes this aid is lost or diluted halfway. The way out of this situation is a stable government and reforms. But you are guessing right. It will not be easy, as it was not easy and it is still not in post-socialist countries. Africa has already begun. Only recently, 54 African countries have joined the free trade agreement between the countries. In translation, this means that goods will be able to flow between countries without major restrictions or tariffs. Such as a system has been operating within the European Union for several years. We can only hope that African countries will not get out of the way of reforms. If you like my channel, please subscribe or donate me through Patreon.